Close your eyes, dear listener. Let your shoulders fall like olive leaves at dusk. We are going someplace still and slow. A place where time doesn't hurry. You are safe. You are quiet. And I'll be right here, gently telling you everything. Our story begins in Tuscany, but not the Tuscany of postcards now. This was an older Tuscany where the hills weren't yet tamed by vineyards, and the roads were still dust and whisper. On one of those hills, shaped like the curve of a sleeping cat, stood a bell tower. It was tall, but not proud. Its stones were faded pink and yellow, soft like parchment left in the sun. And in that tower, hanging by a single iron loop, was the owl bell. They called it that because no one had ever heard it ring, except at night, and even then, only once a year. Always on the first night of October, just as the moon turned full and silent owls flew in wide circles overhead. The villagers said it was a bad omen, but the bellmaker's daughter, well, she wasn't afraid. Her name was Alessa, and she had been born in the bell tower. Her father, Maestro Filippo, had shaped hundreds of bells across Italy, but the owl bell was different. He didn't make it. He found it. One rainy evening, long before Alessa was born, the maestro was walking through an abandoned churchyard outside the village of Monteleone. The trees there were thin and tall, like bony fingers, and the air always smelled of old iron. There, half buried in ivy and moss, he found the owl bell. No inscription, no marking, just a faint feather carved beneath its lip. It rang when he touched it, once, a clear, deep sound that startled the crows from their roosts. He took it home that same night, hung it in the tower, and never heard it ring again except on the 1st of October. Just once, always once. Alessa was a quiet child, not because she was scared, but because her thoughts were always somewhere else. She liked to sit at the base of the tower with her sketchbook, drawing birds with eyes too large and bells with wings. Sometimes she talked to the owl bell. She would tilt her head like it did and whisper questions into the evening wind. Why do you only ring once? What are you warning us about? Do you dream? The bell never answered, but sometimes, just as she drifted to sleep, she thought she heard something in the metal. Not a voice. Not even a word, but a soft hum. Like someone remembering a song from long ago. Her father didn't talk about the bell anymore. Each year on October 1st, he would light a single candle beneath it and then lock the tower door with 3 rusty keys. He told Alessa to stay away that night, but she didn't listen. On her 12th birthday, which happened to be the 1st of October, she crept from her bed and climbed the stairs of the tower barefoot, holding only a small oil lamp and a folded drawing. Outside, the moon was so full it looked like it might tip from the sky. The wind was still. Even the owls hadn't come yet. The bell hung quiet. She stood beneath it, breathless, her lantern flickering against the curved bronze. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. The bell remained silent. She reached into her pocket and unfolded her drawing, a sketch of the owl bell with feathers all around it. Then she did something no one had ever done. She reached out and touched the edge of the bell. For one heartbeat, nothing. Then warmth, not from the metal, from the air. It moved around her like a sigh, and then a low hum, not a chime, not a ring. Just a hum like the sound before a story begins. And that's what this was. A beginning. Alessa stood frozen beneath the owl bell. The hum still curled around her like silk warm and soundless, as if time had drawn in a breath and was holding it gently. Her fingertips tingled from the touch, not from cold, but something older. Like the way your skin remembers the sun long after it's set. She blinked. The bell swayed slightly, though there was no wind. Just the hush of midnight. And as it moved, something fell from inside it, something soft. She knelt. It was a feather. A real one, silver and gray like moonlit ash. And though the bell was made of bronze and iron, no birds could have nested there, not for years. Her heart fluttered. She slipped the feather into her journal, pressing it between pages like a secret. Grazie, she whispered, a whisper back, but not from the bell. From the shadows, she turned. The spiral staircase was empty, save for the soft glow of her lamp. But there had been a voice, small, childlike, and curious, almost as if someone else had whispered thank you in return. Alessa took one slow step toward the sound, her bare feet barely making a sound on the stone. The shadows at the edge of the stair curled like dark lace, delicate and uncertain. She felt no fear, only wonder. Then she saw it, a shape in the wall. A stone shape slightly different than the rest, set deeper, with a faint engraving that hadn't been there before. An owl. Its wings were folded tight and its eyes were closed. Her fingers traced the edge. It clicked. Not loudly, just a soft sound like a pebble dropping into water, and the stone moved. Behind its base, a hollow passage. She held up her lamp. It led into the wall itself, a narrow corridor that turned sharply and vanished into silence. She glanced up at the bell, still silent, but not empty. Something inside it had shifted, as if a long-forgotten clock had ticked once, just once, to mark the moment a dream turned into memory. She stepped into the wall. The passage was cold but dry, and dust clung to her nightdress in tiny whispers. The corridor led her in a slow curve downward, as though she were walking in a spiral, descending deeper into the hill beneath the tower. The walls bore carvings, faint, worn, an owl, a bell, a tree, each etched with a hand not quite human, too long in the wrist, too curved in the grip, like the marks had been made by someone who remembered tools differently. At the base of the curve, she arrived in a round room, small, perfectly circular, the ceiling domed like a bell, and in the center, a single stone pedestal. Upon it, a clock. Old, wooden, the hands made of bone, but it wasn't ticking. And yet, the moment she stepped into the circle, the air changed. Like the sky had blinked. The clock's hands moved just slightly. Alessa stepped closer. The clock had no numbers, just 12 symbols carved into its face. All owls, each one slightly different, some with open wings, some with none. One had no beak. One had eyes that were stars. Her breath fogged the glass, and as it did, the clock ticked again, once and again. Another whisper behind her, but not a word this time, a melody, faint and lullaby slow. A tune she did not know, and yet it made her eyes sting, not from sadness, from remembering something she never lived. The clock ticked again. She backed away slowly, the feathers still pressed close to her heart. And that's when she noticed the dome ceiling had tiny holes, pinpricks, as though it were a star map. And in the center, where the North Star should have been, a carving of the owl bell, with words beneath it, just barely legible. When the bell remembers, the dreamer awakens. Alessa stood beneath the carved dome, her breath barely audible in the hush of the underground chamber. The words beneath the bell engraving, when the bell remembers, the dreamer awakens, lingered in her thoughts like the last echo of a lullaby. She didn't fully understand them, not yet. But her heart seemed to know. It beat slower now, as if keeping time with the gentle ticks of the bone-handled clock before her. Tick, tick. She stepped closer, her fingertips trailing along the cool stone edge of the pedestal. The air in the chamber was calm, but thick with something she couldn't name. Not dust, not dampness, but presence, as if the room itself were breathing, or watching. The symbols on the owl clock seemed to shimmer as she stared at them. Her eyes traced the first owlet's wings wide, its face turned to the left. The second owl eyes closed, body curled as if dreaming. The third head upside down, a spiral over its chest. Each one stirred a feeling in her chest, not fear, but memory. Or maybe longing, Then the clock hands moved again. They shifted with a grace that did not belong to gears or springs, but to something alive. They clicked softly into place, pointing to the 5th and 12th owls. The room changed. A glow stirred in the carved star map above her, faint and golden, like fireflies caught behind old paper. Tiny beams of light filtered through the pinprick stars and fell in lines onto the floor, illuminating parts of the stone like rays of moonlight. And in the light more writing, faint but readable. She knelt to see. Every bell is a vessel. Every ring a memory released. Alessa felt her heart pause. Could the owl bell remember? Could it be dreaming? Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet felt less like stone and more like a ripple. Her surroundings grew quieter still, as though the world above had drifted away entirely, leaving her in a fold of forgotten time. She pressed her hand against the stone and whispered, "What do you remember?" The clock ticked once. A low hum began to rise, not from the bell above, but from the chamber itself. The walls began to shimmer, not physically, but like the surface of water when wind moves across it. And then the room changed. Not all at once, but gently, as though unfolding into something else. The star map above faded, and in its place an image began to glow, not carved, not painted, projected in light. She saw a village not her own, but familiar. The buildings were older, thatched and crooked. The bell tower was smaller, newly built. Children ran across stone streets, and a woman with silver ribbons in her hair held a clock, smiling toward someone just out of view. Alessa stepped back. She wasn't just seeing the past, she was in it. The room was remembering. And she was the dreamer, but not asleep. The woman in the mirror turned, and for a moment, her eyes met Alessa's, though she could not truly see her. And yet, those eyes, they looked just like hers. A sound from above soft, slow, a creak like the bell beginning to sway. The owl bell, it had begun to move again. And somewhere far, far off beyond stone and sky, an owl cried. Alessa stood still within the memory. The chamber glowed faintly with images not made of light nor paint, but memory soft and shimmering, like mist caught in candle fire. Before her, the village lived again. She saw cobbled streets dusted with flour from early baking, saw children chasing hoops made of willow branches. The bell tower, newer, shorter, was being erected by laughing men with sunburnt arms and smudged cheeks. But Alessa's eyes remained on the woman with the silver ribbons. She moved with grace, like someone who had known sorrow but chose softness instead. Her hair was long and dark, threaded with metallic strands that shimmered like moonlight. Around her neck, a key on a velvet ribbon, and in her hands, a small wooden clock, simple, hand-carved, with a tiny owl engraved where the 12 would be. The woman was speaking, but Alessa couldn't hear the words. The memory gave only images, but her lips moved gently, and her smile was full of kindness. She handed the clock to a boy, no older than 8. He hugged it close. Alessa felt her chest ache. Something about this moment felt so familiar, like something she had once dreamed and forgotten upon waking. The scene shimmered like ripples on a pond, then faded. Darkness returned, not frightening, just restful. Alessa closed her eyes, letting the stillness wrap around her. But when she opened them again, the room had changed. She was no longer in the underground dome. She stood at the edge of a garden. It was night, but the sky above shimmered like dusk. The air smelled of rosemary and warm earth. Bells, tiny ones, hung from the branches of pear trees and swayed ever so gently. Each rang a different note, as if the wind were playing a lullaby composed by dreams. She took one step forward, and another. Stone pathways wound between neatly kept garden beds, where odd plants grew flowers with leaves shaped like gears, vines that curled in spiral clock spring patterns. A fountain of center trickled with soft, silvery water, and in it floated feathers, gray, pale, light as whispers, and on a bench near the fountain, the woman again. Older now, but still wearing the silver ribbons. She turned her head slowly. Her voice came not through the air, but through the heart. "You've come far, little bellkeeper?" Alessa's lips parted, but no sound came. "Do you remember?" the woman asked gently. Alessa's voice finally reached her. I don't know what I'm meant to remember." The woman stood. The fountain's melody swelled as she reached into her pocket and drew out a gear-old brass, carved with owl feathers. "This," she whispered, "is yours." As she pressed it into Alessa's hand, the garden faded. The stars turned. The bells rang once, and Alessa awoke, back in the stone chamber beneath the tower. The clock was ticking steadily now, and the gear in her hand was real, cool, and faintly glowing. Alessa sat in silence, the ancient gear resting in her palm like a fallen star. It was warm now, as though it had a heartbeat. She turned it slowly, watching how the tiny feather etchings caught the dim glow of the chamber's starlit ceiling. It fit perfectly into her hand, as if it had waited for her across centuries. The owl clock on the pedestal ticked once more. Then it stopped. Everything paused with it, the air, the stillness, even her breath. Then a low click echoed through the chamber. A compartment beneath the pedestal slid open, revealing a small velvet-lined niche. Inside it, a notebook, bound in deep green leather, aged by time, and tied with a silk ribbon the color of smoke. With reverence, Alessa untied it. The first page was blank, but when she turned it, words emerged, written in a looping, delicate hand. "The bellkeeper must remember what time forgets." Below it, a drawing an owl perched atop a bell, eyes wide open. Surrounding it were names, dozens, maybe hundreds, each written in fading ink. She searched the list and found it near the bottom. Alessa, the ink was still wet. She touched it gently, and the page shimmered. Another vision unfolded, not a place this time, but a feeling. Cold wind, the sound of distant mourning, and a tower struck by lightning, crumbling slowly into dusk. She pulled her hand back, heart fluttering. Whatever her place was in this legacy, it wasn't finished. She stood again, holding the gear tightly. The chamber lights dimmed and brightened, not as if fading, but breathing. Somewhere above her, a bell rope swayed gently. Was she meant to ring it? She stepped toward it, the air thick with memory. Her fingers wrapped around the rope rough, old, but familiar. As if her hand had known this motion in 100 lives before. She pulled. The sound that followed was not loud, not piercing. It was deep, gentle, round as the moon, gunning. The chamber didn't echo, it listened. Stone absorbed the sound, and the stars on the ceiling pulsed with golden light. And then she heard them bells in the distance, dozens, hundreds, layered and soft, like wind chimes from other dreams ringing through time. The notebook in her hand fluttered open again. More pages now, maps, instructions, symbols like the ones on the owl clock. She wasn't simply meant to remember. She was meant to restore. The bellkeeper's role wasn't passive. It was protective, and now the bell had chosen her. A door appeared where there had been only wall framed in wood and carved with tiny owls in flight. Alessa took one last look at the chamber. The clock ticked once, and she stepped through the doorway into the forgotten parts of the tower, where time waited to be awakened. The door closed behind her with a sound like rustling parchment. Alessa stood at the threshold of a long, winding corridor. The walls here were rough-hewn, not like the soft stone of the chamber below. These were older, untouched for decades, maybe centuries. Her lamp flickered gently, casting soft golden halos on the walls. Each step she took stirred the air like breath on the nape of her neck, cool, but never cold. Welcoming in a strange, quiet way. The air carried the scent of lavender dust and time-worn wood. Along the left wall were dozens of tiny niches, each housing a small bronze bell. Some were cracked, others were whole. All were etched with symbols too faint to read at a glance. Alessa paused before one, a bell no larger than a plum, its metal greened with age. She gently lifted it from its cradle and turned it in her hand. At its base was an engraving, for the dream that must not be forgotten. She returned it carefully to its place. Further down the passage, she discovered a narrow alcove. Inside it, a painting faded and soft from time of a girl with long dark hair, standing beneath the owl bell. Her face was not shown, but Alessa felt something stir. The figure in the painting wore a silver ribbon, and around her wrist, tied in delicate twine, was a familiar brass gear. Alessa's fingers went to her pocket, where the same gear still rested. She moved deeper. The corridor curved now, tightening like a spiral. The architecture became less like a tower and more like a labyrinth of arches, creaking beams and strange symbols scratched into the wood. Feathers, moons, clocks turned backward. Each wall seemed to lean inward, not in threat, but as if listening. Then she arrived at another door. This one wasn't stone or wood. It was metal cool, brushed, and covered with overlapping gears, some turning slowly as she approached. There was no handle, but in its center was a slot, a perfect fit for the gear. Alessa hesitated only a moment, then slipped the gear into place. A soft hum, then click. The gears spun faster. Light leaked through the seams in warm pulses, like a heartbeat answering her own. The door opened inward, and beyond it, a room bathed in twilight blue. It was vast, circular, like a great observatory turned inward. Shelves lined the walls, each holding scrolls, tools, and dozens of small, glimmering timepieces, none of which ticked. In the center, a table of deep oak, carved with owl wings fanned like sunbursts. Upon it sat a single object beneath a glass dome. A bell, smaller than the owl bell, but similar. It pulsed with light not bright, but steady. A glow that felt alive. Next to it, a note. She leaned in. To the next bellkeeper, this bell holds the moment of sorrow forgotten. Restore it only when the dreamer is ready. Alessa reached out not to lift it, but to feel. The moment her fingers touched the dome, the room hushed even further. No ticking, no creaking, only breath. Her own, and one more. A presence, familiar now. She turned slowly. There, in the corner shadows, stood the woman with the silver ribbons, older, quieter, but watching with a kind, tired smile. Alessa's throat tightened. "Why me?" she whispered. The woman stepped forward. "Because you listened," and then she faded. Not with drama or sound, but like mist when the morning comes. Alessa remained still, her fingertips hovering above the bell beneath the dome. The warmth from it was not physical. It reached into the quiet corners of her chest, places she hadn't known were waiting to be found. It felt like a sigh long held, a grief long buried. She slowly lifted the dome. The air didn't change, yet something shifted, like the room took one breath in and held it. The bell sat exposed now, its bronze darkened, not with age but memory. It was edged with waves and branches, and a small figure curled at its base sleeping, no clapper inside. Silent by design, beside the bell, the wooden table began to glow faintly. Lines appeared gold, delicate, like fine calligraphy writing itself across the wood grain. A map, not of a village, not of any land she knew, but of moments. Each glowing mark was shaped like a star, with names that weren't names, but feelings. The day of the unspoken goodbye, the last bread shared, the broken lullaby, dozens, hundreds, all lost moments. And at the center of them all, the sorrow bell. Alessa ran her fingers along the paths between them. They connected like constellations, not random but intentional, as if someone, long ago, had collected all the softest pieces of sorrow and preserved them gently. She heard the ticking again, but not from the owl clock, from within her. The brass gear inside her pocket pulsed faintly, almost like it breathed. She removed it and gently pressed it against the bell's base. Nothing moved. Then a sound, not a chime, not a ring. Just a note, like a single droplet falling into a still pond. And in her mind's ear, a voice, faint, feminine, gentle. Do not fear the sorrow, little bellkeeper. For sorrow is where time folds its wings to rest. Alessa's eyes stung. She didn't know why, not yet. But she understood the truth in that voice. This bell was not meant to sound loudly. It was meant to remember quietly. She sat beside the table, cross-legged on the wooden floor, and opened the green journal once more. Its pages now turned on their own, revealing blueprints, instructions, memories written in poetry and sketches. A diagram of the owl bell with annotations around its carved feather. When memory is light, the bell will sing again. Alessa looked around the chamber. Above her, a ceiling shaped like a clock face glowed faintly. 12 owl feathers marked the hours. And at the center, a circular opening she hadn't seen before, high above. A sliver of moonlight slipped through. Not just light, memory light. She stood slowly. Her fingers closed gently around the sorrow bell. It felt heavier now, not in weight, but in presence. As if she had taken a truth into her hands. Then the shelves behind her began to turn softly, slowly rotating inward to reveal stairs, not down, but up, to the tower, to the owl bell itself. Alessa stepped onto the winding staircase, the sorrow bell cradled in her arms like a sleeping bird. The stairs were narrow, and the stone beneath her bare feet was smoother than she remembered, worn not by centuries of footsteps, but by dreams passing through in silence. The further she climbed, the more the air changed. Warmer now, tinged with the scent of iron, lavender, and something older than dust. Above her, the sliver of moonlight widened into a shaft of silvery breath. She climbed slowly, carefully, her thoughts soft, her heartbeat steady. When she reached the top landing, the bell chamber greeted her like an old friend. It was still. The great owl bell hung above, unmoving in its cradle of dark wood and tarnished rope. But the air shimmered faintly as though the walls remembered song. Alessa stepped into the chamber's center and set the sorrow bell on a stone pedestal beneath the owl bell. The two bells did not touch. They didn't need to. The room grew quiet. Quieter than silence. The moonlight filtered in through the bell tower's thin windows, catching dust motes that spun like little planets. She looked up and realized she was no longer alone. Perched in the rafters on old wooden beams were owls, not many, just 3. Silent, silver-eyed, and unmoving. They watched without blinking, heads tilted in perfect stillness. Alessa bowed her head slightly, as if greeting them without words. Then she turned back to the sorrow bell and placed her hand gently over its curve. It was warm now, and beneath her fingers, a soft vibration, like a memory waiting for permission. She whispered, "You may ring," and without a sound, it did, not through air, not through vibration, but through feeling. The bell remembered, and in that remembrance, it released. The chamber filled with something that wasn't music, wasn't voice, but something in between. Alessa's eyes fluttered closed. Images rose not in front of her, but inside her. A mother braiding her daughter's hair before dawn, whispering words neither would remember. A soldier pressing a dried violet into the binding of a prayer book. A baker singing under his breath as he kneaded dough in an empty shop. Moments that had been forgotten, not lost, just quieted, and the bell remembered them all. When she opened her eyes again, the owls were gone, but not far. Their silence remained like a blessing. She turned slowly to the owl bell. It swayed gently now, not by wind, nor by hand, but by kinship. It had heard the sorrow bell, and in that hearing, something deep inside it shifted. The feathers carved at its base seemed to gleam, and then, softly, like a breath caught in the throat of chime, gunning, it rang once, and the entire tower exhaled. Alessa felt it not just in her ears, but in her chest, her hands, her bones. It wasn't a sound. It was truth. The owl bell had remembered. And so had she. The ringing faded, but the feeling remained. Soft, expansive, tender as a lullaby sung from beyond the veil of time. Alessa stood with her eyes closed, the silence around her filled with presence. She didn't move, not yet. The echo of the owl bell wasn't just a sound, it was a door to memory, not only of the tower or its keepers, but of herself. She breathed in slowly, and with that breath, something within her shifted. She saw herself as a small child, curled on her father's lap beside the hearth, while he mended a watch with trembling fingers. He had been telling her the story of the bell he never made, the bell that rang without cause. She remembered how he paused mid-sentence, how his eyes had drifted, as if chasing something far away. Now she understood. He had heard it too. She looked up at the owl bell, suspended like a great moon in the rafters. Its surface was no longer dull, it shimmered faintly, and not just from the moonlight. Something had awakened in it, and in her. The pedestal where she deplaced the sorrow bell now glowed beneath a faint circle of blue light. A new symbol had appeared at its base, an owl with open wings, its talons grasping a clock that had no hands. A gift, a key. Alessa knelt and ran her fingers across the carving. Her hand tingled as the stone warmed. It was not just stone, it was memory, etched and sealed with time. Suddenly, the wind stirred. Not from the windows, from within the tower. The great ropes attached to the owl bell quivered slightly, as though the tower were drawing breath again after a long, deep slumber. Alessa turned as something caught her eye, a small brass lantern near the steps, flickering with a soft violet flame. She had not noticed it before. Inside it, a folded piece of parchment. She opened it slowly. The ink was old, but the words were clear. There will come one who hears the bell not as a warning, but as a song. When that soul comes, they must not be guided by fear. They must be guided by feeling. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her journal. Behind her, the sound of rustling feathers. She turned. One of the owls had returned. It perched silently at the edge of the high window ledge, the moonlight illuminating the curve of its wings. In its beak a ribbon, silver, frayed at the edges, just like the one worn by the woman from her visions. The owl released it, and the ribbon drifted down in slow, gentle spirals, landing softly at Alessa's feet. She reached down and picked it up, tied it gently into her hair. The moment she did, the clock face above, the one carved into the ceiling, lit up once more. The owl feathers marking the hours shimmered. The hands of the unseen clock clicked once, and then began to move. Tick, tock. Not hurried, measured, like the beginning of a great patient work. Time had begun again. As the unseen clock above began its slow, deliberate ticking, Alessa felt the entire tower shift beneath her feet, not physically, but as if something buried deep within the stones had exhaled for the first time in centuries. She descended the spiral stairs, the silver ribbon now tucked gently into her braid. The sorrow bell remained behind on its pedestal, no longer glowing, but still emanating a warmth that pulsed faintly in her memory. At the base of the stair, the gear-carved door she had once passed through was open again, but this time it revealed a different passage. The air smelled of mint and wet stone. And further down, she could hear something, soft and flowing, water. She followed the new hallway, lit by lanterns that flared quietly to life as she passed, until she reached a door covered in ivy. She pushed it open. and stepped into a garden. It was not the garden from her vision, not entirely, but it carried the same hush, the same peace. The sky above was early dawn, though she had not felt the night pass. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the stars had begun to fade in the indigo sky. The owls hung from branches again, small and delicate, but this time they rang, not loudly, not in chorus, just one at a time, as if they were speaking to her. A soft ting from a tree near the wall, a chime from the bush by her foot. Each tone seemed to correspond with her presence, like the garden recognized her. There, at the center of the garden, stood a sundial made of obsidian and bone. Its shadow pointed not to a number, but to a symbol, the owl. Carved in profile, wings outstretched, a crescent moon beneath its feet. And around the base of the sundial words, etched in the stone in a ring, when the dreamer hears what the clock forgets, the garden shall bloom again. Alessa knelt beside the sundial, brushing her fingers over the mossy lettering. The moment her hand touched the stone, a gentle ripple spread out from her. The garden shimmered. Leaves brightened, bells hummed, and slowly, from the vines, from beneath the roots, from the soil kissed by centuries of sleep, tiny golden blossoms began to unfurl. They opened in silence, except for one. A flower, deep purple, opened at her feet and released a note, a single tone, clear, soft, like the first sigh of morning. And in her mind's ear, she heard a voice once more, not the woman with silver ribbons, but herself. The garden is not behind you. It is ahead, and it lives in every quiet moment you choose to keep. The sundial shimmered, then cracked open in the center. Inside a mirror, old, fogged. But she could see herself, and behind her reflection, the outline of owls in flight, circling not above her, but within her. She closed the sundial gently, not out of fear, but respect. And when she turned to leave the garden, the bells behind her rang in unison, a sound not of farewell, but of passage. Beyond the garden, a narrow archway opened to another staircase, this one descending, but not into the coldness of cellars or stone. It descended into warmth. The walls here were lined with dark cherrywood panels. Carved owls watched from the corners, their eyes polished with glassy amber. The steps creaked gently beneath her, not in protest, but in greeting. They remembered feet like hers. At the bottom of the stair, she found a small study, or rather, a workshop, though not one like her father's. This space had not seen dust in centuries. Every surface was clean, every tool gleamed. Time had not passed here, or rather, it had paused, obediently waiting. A wide table stood in the center of the room, bearing an open ledger. The moment Alessa stepped inside, a lantern above the table flared to life with a soft oomph, casting golden light across the room. Shadows shrank into corners. The air smelled of beeswax, dried chamomile, and ink. She approached the ledger slowly. Its pages were yellowed, but not brittle. She read the first line aloud, her voice no more than a breath. The clockmaker's garden is not built, it is remembered. Her fingertips turned the page. Sketches met her eyes, detailed diagrams of bells, gears, sundials, and garden layouts. Some were labeled in ink, others in charcoal, as if added in dreams. One page showed the owl bell itself sliced in cross-section like a fruit with feathers running through its metal core. It had never been hollow. It had always been alive. On another page, she found a map of the village, not as it was now, but as it had once been. The well was there, the old baker's shop, the red-roofed inn. But in the place where her house would have been, there was only a single word written in delicate calligraphy. Silence. She frowned. The pages beneath the map rustled as though moved by breath. She turned them gently. Then she found it. A page labeled, "The next bellkeeper, no sketch, just words. When the bells remember, she will arrive. She will carry sorrow, but walk with light. She will not fix time. She will feel it. The final line was written in a darker ink. Do not teach her. Trust her. Alessa swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled slightly, but not from fear. From knowing. Her whole life, she had felt something ticking beneath her ribs, a quiet rhythm she could never name. And now she understood. She had always heard the bells. She sat down in the leather chair before the table, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe in the room, the scent, the ticking silence, the presence. She opened her eyes and turned the page again. The next diagram was unfinished. A bell, smaller, newer, waiting. The diagram was drawn in graphite, its lines still smudged by fingertips that had dreamed it but never finished. It wasn't quite a bell knot yet. The shape was there, yes, but it was incomplete, paused in the act of becoming. At the top of the page, in faded script, Bell of the Living Memory. Below the drawing were only 5 words, can only be cast together. Alessa traced the outline of the unfinished bell with one finger. It was smaller than the owl bell, and unlike the sorrow bell, this one had room for a clapper, a harp. Around its base were marks for engraving, some shaped like hands, some like stars, and one like a closed eye. She leaned back, letting her breath slow. The ledger whispered as she turned more pages. One held pressed flowers, lavender, forget-me-not, and rosemary, each labeled with a name and a single memory. Elira, the last lullaby. Kausi, the feather before winter. Thomas, the wish made of bread. She paused. These weren't just notes. They were offerings, moments gifted to the bell before it had ever rung. She turned again and found a list of materials, not metals, not chemicals, but feelings. One whispered promise. Two tears never shed. 3, a silence that healed. 4, a moment that changed no one but you. 5, one breath held in wonder. No forge could heat these. No hammer could shape them. The spell would have to be formed in another way. From being... She stood slowly, lantern light flickering across her cheeks like candlelight across parchment. Her shadow moved with her, quiet and long. In the far corner of the workshop stood a cupboard. She hadn't noticed it before. It was small, unadorned, and bound with a silk ribbon gray, fraying, tied in the same way her mother once tied the herbs in bundles above their hearth. She unfastened the knot and opened the doors. Inside was an assortment of strange objects, a gear wrapped in twine, a spool of thread made of something that shimmered like dawn, and a single bell mold thin, worn, and covered in etched names. The mold was warm. She lifted it carefully. It was small, like the one in the drawing, but it was whole. And in the center, written so lightly she almost missed it, were the words, "You are the fire." A soft click behind her. She turned. The owl with amber eyes had returned. But this time it perched upon the ledge of an open window. And beyond it, the village, not as she'd left it, but changed. Lights flickered in homes that had long been quiet. The bell tower stood still. But around its base, people gathered silent, curious, drawn as if by a dream they couldn't name. Alessa felt it in her bones. They had heard it too. The bell's one note had reached them. It was time. Not to tell them, but to bring them. Alessa cradled the bell mold gently against her chest. It pulsed not with heat, but with a quiet resonance, like a heartbeat heard in dreams. She stepped through the open doorway into the dusky air beyond the tower. The owl with amber eyes took flight ahead of her, its wings soundless as moonlight. The cobblestones beneath her bare feet were cool, worn smooth by generations. As she walked, the village slowly came into view, and she realized something. It was not ruins that she saw. It was restoration. Windows once shuttered were open. Lights flickered softly. Doorways were swept clean, and in each threshold, someone stood, silent, watching. They didn't speak, but they knew. She passed the old fountain where children once played. Its waters now trickled gently, the way they used to when time still moved with laughter. Beside it sat an old man with weathered hands, turning a wooden bird in his lap. He looked up as she passed, his eyes shimmering. He didn't bow. He placed a hand over his heart. One by one, as she moved through the square, others did the same. A silent recognition, not worship, not awe, but memory. A small girl ran from her doorstep to hand Alessa a feather gray and soft. She tucked it into the folds of her sash without breaking stride. Near the baker's shop, a woman lit a tiny lantern and hung it from her awning, as if signaling. And then, from the alley behind the inn, an old woman emerged, her silver hair wrapped in a violet scarf. She carried a ribbon, tied in a knot only someone from the bell line would know. Alessa paused. The woman's eyes met hers, and she whispered just once, "It's time." At the base of the bell tower, the crowd had gathered, not in throngs, not in clamor, but like stones in a riverbed quiet, grounded, ready. Alessa stepped up onto the old stone platform. She held up the mold. No voice rose. No bell rang. And yet the air changed. A soft hum passed through the crowd. Then, from somewhere unseen, a song began, hummed at first. Low, slow, like breath in winter. One voice, then another. Then another, a lullaby without words. It rose, not in volume, but in warmth. It filled the square, the alleys, the rooftops. Alessa set the mold at the center of the platform. Then she reached into her pouch. She removed 5 things: a whispered promise tied in blue thread, 2 tears caught in a vial made of frost glass, a moment of healing wrapped in lace, a folded scrap of parchment with a memory only she could name, and 1 single held breath. She placed them one by one into the mold. The hum grew softer now. Holding its breath, waiting, she looked to the owl bell far above. Then she looked to the sky. The stars blinked, and somewhere a feather fell. She placed her hand over the mold and closed her eyes. The bell did not chime. It bloomed. It happened so gently, so silently, that most wouldn't have noticed, were it not for the way the air changed. The mold glowed from within, not with fire, but with remembrance. The 5 offerings Alessa placed, those quiet relics of unseen moments, didn't melt, didn't burn. They became. Each folded itself into the form of the bell, not by force, but by choice, as though they knew this was where they belonged. Alessa stepped back as the glow settled into shape. The mold split softly along its seam. The top half lifted, though no hand touched it. The bell inside was no larger than her palm and shimmered with a finish not of metal, but of dreamlight. No inscription, no ornament, just a small, perfect bell. Its clapper was a tear suspended in gold. She reached out and cradled it in both hands. The bell was warm, not hot familiar, as though she'd always carried it even when she didn't know she was meant to. A hush fell over the square. Every window now had a light. Every heart an ache they could finally name. And then she rang it. The bell released a note so soft, so inside, that for a moment no one moved, no one breathed. Then the sky responded. Above the tower, clouds parted gently, not torn but invited. A soft beam of moonlight spilled directly over the platform, touching the bell in her hands. And for the first time in centuries, the owl bell stirred again, not in sound, but in glow. Its feathers shimmered. Its carvings pulsed faintly. The great gears above began to rotate, not with the weight of time, but with the grace of memory. And beneath her feet, Alessa felt it. The tower thanked her. Around her, the people in the square did not cheer. They did not applaud. They closed their eyes. Each one, as though the bell had called them inward, to a place they had once been and could finally return to. A child began to hum. It was the same melody Alessa had heard in the workshop. Another joined, and another, not loud, not rehearsed, but shared. She placed the bell into a tiny niche on the platform. It clicked softly into place as though it had always belonged there. The pedestal accepted it like a heartbeat accepts a breath. The stone beneath it etched a new word, lived. The petals of the bell mold scattered softly into ash, floating upward like fireflies. A few landed on the rooftops, glowing faintly before fading. The owl returned amber eyes, wide wings, landing beside the bell and bowing its head. Alessa bowed too. Not to the owl, not to the crowd, but to the moment. To the time that had chosen her, and the time she had chosen in return. Long after the final note of the new bell had dissolved into the night air, the crowd began to quietly disperse, not out of confusion or ceremony, but with the reverent hush of those who had touched something sacred. No one spoke. They didn't need to. A silence had bloomed, one that carried no burden, only presence. Alessa remained on the stone platform. The owl still sat nearby, feathers soft and folded, eyes glowing with something that resembled peace. She turned once more toward the tower. It no longer loomed. It waited. She climbed the stone steps slowly, the breeze playing gently with her braid, tugging at the silver ribbon now dulled by night air and dreams. Inside, the air had changed. It smelled now of lavender steeped in honey and the faint metallic breath of something finished. The bells in the hallway no longer whispered. They rested. Each one hung in stillness, not empty but fulfilled. She passed them like old friends, her fingers trailing just beneath them. They did not ring. Not because they were unwilling, but because their song had already been sung. In the workshop, the table was clear, the ledger now closed. But upon its cover, etched as if it had always been there, was her name. Not Alessa, but a simple title, bellkeeper. She sat down once more in the leather chair, not because she had work to do, but because she wanted to listen. And in that stillness, she heard it, the smallest ticking, not from the tower, but from beneath the floorboards. She rose, followed the sound, and lifted a square of the old wood beneath the rug. Inside, nestled in velvet and mauve lace cloth, was a box. Inside the box, another bell, old, dusty, cracked. It didn't shine, it didn't glow, but it waited. She lifted it and held it in both hands. Its weight was uneven, its tone broken, yet she cradled it as gently as she had the first. And when she listened closely, she heard a hum, faint, wavering, but real. There was still something inside this bell that hadn't been finished. Not history, not regret, but a memory unheard. Alessa carried it upstairs, past the sorrow bell, past the new bell, all the way to the very top, where the owl bell watched over the village like a lantern of quiet time. She sat beside it, placed the broken bell gently in her lap, and whispered, "You don't have to ring, just rest." She stayed there long into the night, not waiting for sound, but keeping watch. Above her, the stars moved slowly, like a lullaby turning in the dark. And below, in the village, the bells dreamed. The wind turned warmer, as though spring had exhaled softly across the eaves of the bell tower. Alessa remained seated beside the owl bell, her fingers resting lightly on the broken bell in her lap. Though the bell would never ring again, it had given her something else, stillness, not the stillness of endings, but the stillness of belonging. Below, the village glowed with gentle lamps and flickering hearths. Windows blinked like sleepy stars. The people had not returned to sleep, not really. They had settled into something deeper, a hush that healed. Above her, the ceiling of the bell chamber began to shimmer. The painted clock face faint for centuries now shone clear. Each of the 12 feathers marking the hours had begun to shift, slowly rotating like petals of a clock flower, clicking gently into place. And at the center, for the first time, a pair of hands appeared. They were not painted. They were not metal. They were made of light, soft, like threads of moon-dusted memory. And they ticked, not forward, not backward, but inward, toward a moment long awaited. Alessa stood slowly. She didn't know what the clock above her meant, not in full, but she knew it had waited, for her. For this, she stepped toward the far edge of the bell chamber, where an old wooden hatch rested sealed since the time of her great-grandfather. When she knelt to lift it, the wood moved with surprising ease. Beneath it, a ladder descended into a space no blueprint had ever marked. She climbed down, the scent of jasmine and aged parchment guiding her. At the bottom, she found a small circular room. Not as grand as the garden, not as vast as the archive. This room was personal. Shelves lined the walls, each holding a single item. A ribbon, a button, a wooden spoon, a dried fig leaf, a broken compass, a tiny toy wheel, and each shelf bore a name. Not famous names, just names. Nico, Pyrrha, Thorn, Mina, Giovanni. People who had lived, dreamed, forgotten. Each object was a bell in its own way. Not made to chime, but to mark. She walked slowly, tracing her fingers along the dustless wood. These were memories too fragile to be held in stone, and yet they endured. In the center of the room was a table with a single book. No title, just a soft leather cover worn smooth by hands long gone. She opened it. Inside, a single page. And a single phrase, "What is kept in silence is never truly gone." Alessa closed the book, placed it back in its place, and climbed the ladder once more, back into the chamber where the owl bell pulsed faintly with its feathered breath. She looked out over the village, and for the first time she understood. The bells were never guardians, they were gardeners. They did not protect time, they nurtured it, allowed it to grow where no one looked. And now, as the stars gently turned above her, Alessa closed her eyes and heard the world breathe. Dawn had not yet arrived, and still the light had changed. It wasn't sunlight that kissed the bell tower now. It was the light of recognition, a hush of things finally seen. Alessa stepped down from the bell chamber slowly, the broken bell still in her hands. It no longer felt incomplete. It simply felt done, like a chapter that knew its final sentence. She walked past the familiar halls where bells hung in honored sleep, and then she turned toward the corridor where the ivy door had once opened to the garden. This time it was already ajar. The garden had been waiting. As she stepped through, a warm breeze greeted her, carrying scents of chamomile, thyme, and something sweeter, perhaps memory itself. The flowers had changed again. Where once had been purple blossoms and golden petals, now soft white blooms fluttered, their edges glowing faintly with silver. They shifted with the air, as if nodding to her presence. In the center of the garden, where the sundial once stood, something new had grown. A tree, young, slender, its bark pale, smooth like silk. From its branches hung threads of light, soft as cobwebs, swaying in rhythm with the breath of the bells. And at the tree's base, nestled in a hollow of its roots, lay a book, not the ledger, not the memory book, but something else. She picked it up carefully. Its cover was made of pressed petals. When she opened it, the pages revealed no ink, only impressions. Raised shapes, fingerprints, curves of feathers, pressings of lips, of leaves, of tears. Moments left not to be read, but felt. She closed the book and sat at the foot of the tree. Above her, the branches swayed like a lullaby. The owl returned again, silent as always, but this time it perched not above her, beside her. Its feathers brushed her shoulder lightly, and she did not flinch. Together, they listened, not to chimes or songs, but to echoes, echoes of footsteps on old staircases, of stories told beside fires, of names whispered before sleep. The bells had never wanted to be heard in grand peals. They had wanted to be remembered like this, soft, still, shared. Alessa placed the broken bell at the tree's base, A bloom unfurled beside it, not because it was fixed, but because it was honored. And as she sat there, head resting lightly against the bark, the owl keeping watch, the tree began to hum, not aloud, but within her. The garden did not end here. It extended beyond the tower, beyond the village, into every place a bell had once been struck and forgotten. It lived in lullabies, in tea poured gently at dawn, in old clocks whose hands no longer moved, but still ticked within someone's memory, and it would grow. Because she had listened, because we listen. Alessa awoke in the garden with the owl still beside her, and the trees humming now faded into a warm silence. There was no disorientation, no forgetting, just a calm, as if she had slept within time rather than through it. The book of pressed impressions still rested in her lap, now slightly warm from her presence. She traced one raised shape, an old woman's handprint, creased and gentle, curled as though cradling a child. Another page held the indent of a feather, so light she could barely feel it. But she knew it had been left by the owl, not this owl, but an owl, perhaps long before she was born. She closed the book and stood, brushing soft petals from her dress. The garden remained still, waiting not for action, but attention. She walked slowly past flowers that nodded with each step. Their scent had deepened overnight, no longer floral, but earthy, familiar, the scent of morning air in her father's shop, of pages drying on the line, of a pot of tea left to cool, not forgotten, but savored. At the far end of the garden, a path had opened, a narrow trail through low hedges and lanterns that shimmered faintly in the rising light. She followed it, each footfall soft on moss-covered stones. The path led her not away from the tower, but beneath it, into its very roots. There, she found a circular room filled with light. No lanterns, no windows. Just light, pouring upward from the floor like mist, golden and slow. In the center stood a table. Upon it, a single clock, small, unwound. Its face bore no numbers, only symbols she recognized from the bells. A ribbon, a tear, a feather, a leaf, a closed eye, a moon, and a hand. Her fingers hovered over the clock's crown. She did not wind it. She touched it, and time began to feel, not move, not measure. Just become. Images passed before her, not as visions, but sensations. A child setting down a stone and calling it treasure. A baker placing a warm roll on a windowsill for no one in particular. A woman brushing her mother's hair in silence. A man pressing a kiss to the forehead of a sleeping dog. A young girl choosing not to ring a bell and simply listening instead. These were not the loud events that history recorded. These were the threads between, and the clock remembered them. Alessa stepped back. The clock stopped ticking, but its warmth remained. She placed both hands over her heart and whispered, "Thank you," not to the clock, not to the tower, but to time itself. Time that had never rushed her, never demanded, just waited until she was ready. The owl circled above once more, and as it landed, a single feather floated down and came to rest on the clock's surface. It did not ring, but somehow it resounded. When Alessa emerged from the room beneath the tower, dawn had fully arrived, but it was not loud. It was velvet pale, slipping over rooftops like a warm sigh. The village glowed not with grandeur, but with quiet grace, as if every chimney, window, and cobbled street now breathed together. The bells were silent, but no one missed them, because their song lingered in the very air woven into the fabric of the morning itself. She stepped into the square once more, her hands empty, her heart full. The people were already gathering, not in lines, not in procession, just coming forward one by one, to stand, to look, to be. They didn't need instruction. They carried time within them now. The first to step forward was a small boy holding a toy owl carved from olive wood. He looked up at her, blinking sleepily, and held it out. Alessa knelt, took the owl gently, and smiled. Not because it was an offering, but because it belonged. Behind him, an elder followed her cane, carved with ancient symbols. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, her eyes moist with something older than tears. Others came, a baker with flour still on her sleeves, a boy holding a jar of fireflies even though the sun had risen, a mother with a shawl that carried the scent of time, a teacher holding a bell that no longer rang. Each brought something, each left something, and Alessa knew then. The bell tower was no longer hers alone. It was theirs. The bells would no longer be guarded. They would be tended, grown like a garden, remembered like a lullaby. She walked slowly back to the tower and pushed open the door, not wide, but just enough. And as each person stepped inside, the air shimmered slightly, as if accepting them. She would not tell them where to go. She would not explain the feathers, or the books, or the garden. She would let them find it, because finding was the first act of keeping. Near the owl bell, the platform had changed. It no longer held just the new bell. It now bore small niches, many each, glowing faintly, not from light, but from readiness. Each space waited for another offering, not forged, not declared, but felt. A boy placed a pebble he had carried since spring. A girl left the braid she'd made with her grandmother. A man laid down a broken watch, long stopped, once belonging to his brother. Each item found its place. Each bell within them hummed softly, not in metal, but in meaning. Alessa stood beside the owl bell one last time and looked up. The gears had stilled, but in their stillness she saw movement, not mechanical, but alive. The tower had become a keeper, and the village, a bell. Rung not by sound, but by presence. The sun rose gently behind the hills of the village, casting soft golden light across the rooftops, the gardens, the bells. There was no fanfare, no final chime, just the warmth of morning, and the soft hush of something completed. Alessa stood at the edge of the bell platform, watching as the townspeople moved like water through the square sun returning home. Some sitting beneath trees, others simply standing with their eyes closed, as if to carry this moment into their next breath. She did not wave, she did not bow. She simply placed a hand over her chest and felt it there again, that quiet rhythm, the one she had always known, the one she now understood. She stepped away from the platform and made her way back through the tower's halls. The bells no longer whispered to her. They rested, slept, trusted. On the way to the garden, she paused by the corridor of feathers. Each one was still gently swaying now. There was no breeze. It was not wind that moved them. It was memory. She entered the garden once more. The young tree stood tall, now its branches fuller, its leaves a deeper green. Small blossoms had begun to form along the stems, their petals resembling clock hands, curved and delicate. At the base of the tree, the broken bell she had once laid there had softened even more. It no longer looked cracked. It looked rooted, as if it had always belonged to the earth beneath the garden. She knelt beside it, not to fix, not to grieve, just to be with it. The owl returned, landing not above her, but beside her. They watched together in stillness as the garden shimmered faintly under the morning light. No more secrets, no more searching. Just the truth of presence. In the distance, the great owl bell gave one final breath. Not a ring, not a song, just the soft, low hole. And it was enough. Alessa rose, turned once more to the tower, and whispered, "I will come back." She didn't need to say when. She didn't need to promise. The tower knew. And so did time. She walked slowly down the path toward the village, where windows opened, doors creaked, and kettles were warming. People didn't ask questions, they smiled. And in their smiles, she saw it, they remembered. And they would carry that memory forward, in the way they spoke, in the way they held silence, in the way they listened when there was nothing left to say. As she crossed the small stone bridge at the edge of the village, she looked back once. The tower stood tall, wrapped in ivy and light. A feather drifted down from its highest window. She caught it gently, pressed it between her palms, and continued walking into the morning, into the quiet, into the forever that begins again with the hush of a bell